Hello and welcome to Common Ground. I'm your host, Sheriff Steve Tompkins. Now, today is like one of those fantastic days. Today is one of those shows that I really eagerly look forward to because we have two extraordinary guests. And we're going to begin with the House Speaker, Mr. Bob DeLeo from Winthrop, my guy in Suffolk County. He is so cool. And I know a lot of you know him and a lot of you love him principally because aside from being just a great guy, he is a great advocate for the communities that he serves and the Commonwealth in its totality. So without any further ado, sir, thank you so much for coming on today.
Mr. Sheriff, thank you.
I really appreciate it.
It's always good to be here with my friend.
Oh, it's so much fun, so much. And that's another thing. We can't like sit in a room together without that, but that's another story. You know what? So let's start with the issue of gun violence. Now, my understanding is that when Marty Walsh came into the city of Boston, at least as mayor, he's doing a gun, I'm not sure if it's a buyback program, but he's getting guns off the street. Talk to me from the point of a legislator's viewpoint, rather, the epidemic of guns getting into neighborhoods, particularly low-income neighborhoods, and the damage that those are doing.
Sure. We've had an exceptional amount of deaths due to firearms. I think, first of all, the so-called incident of the massive killing, so to speak, quite frankly, have become only a monthly disaster. And not to mention day in and day out in our cities, not only in our cities, I say, but throughout the state, where you have, young people being killed.
Yeah.
So it is a major problem. I think what started the whole push to us taking another look at guns was the factor of the Sandy Hook disaster in Connecticut.
Right.
And then, quite frankly, having said that, and having, followed the news with it, you would see each and every day there would be basically some young person who'd be getting shot and killed, that didn't have to happen.
Right.
So, in a sense, I decided at that point to bring forward some legislation to update the laws that we have here in Massachusetts.
Okay.
Massachusetts is already looked upon as having some of the strongest gun laws in the country.
Okay.
But I wanted to see if we could make them
stronger. How do you propose to make them stronger?
Well, we have in the sense that, first of all, mental health issues.
Yeah.
That's proven. I think you, Mr. Sheriff, probably know better than anyone in terms of some of the inmates that you have. The issue of mental health and these guns getting into the wrong hands. So that, first of all, the state is now in a registry so that we will have records of anyone who has any mental health issues.
Right.
In addition to that, before you could get a card if you just wanted to use a rifle for hunting, well, that no longer exists. Now you have to go through the process of the police chief.
Okay.
And whatnot. It was always my theory that harm can come as a result of a rifle as well as a handgun. Yeah. In addition to that, when you want to transfer your weapon, there's a system now wherein they'll check any past record that you
because that hadn't been in place before. If I understand this correctly.
It could be a lot easier, but now it's going to require some work and some background checks as to both parties.
So let's get into the politics of this now. Do you expect a big push back from the gun lobbyists and so on and so forth?
First of all, we passed it last year, and we did. I will tell you that I learned quite a bit with this legislation. I admit to being naive.
Yeah.
I came when I saw it, and when I saw something I felt had to be done. Right. And I went to some of the folks in the House and say, hey, I think we ought to tackle this issue and do something about this. And they say, you know what you're getting yourself into? Yeah. I say, well, this is Massachusetts, number one.
Right.
And number two, it's about keeping guns off the street.
Yeah.
What could be so difficult at that? And
right.
I quickly learned that the gun lobby is a very strong.
They're strong.
They're a strong lobby. There are those out there who just don't want to see you make any of the changes at all, no matter what.
Yeah.
But I called in some of the folks from the Gun Owners Action League here of Massachusetts, And I said, let's talk about this one-on-one. Number one, I'm not going away. I'm not going to retreat. What are your issues relative to, guns? And they said that they had issues relative to when they want to re-up the license or something like that, that it was being delayed. And I said, okay, well, maybe we can make that part of the legislation. But, another part of this legislation has to be, the biggest part has to be about containing gun violence.
Yeah, yeah.
And when I sat down with them, and I says, I think that you and I both want to get at the same people.
Yeah.
Those people who are doing, and I quote, bad things with guns. Yeah. So I'm sure that we're all in the same avenue to try to.
So they were open. They were open to a sane, rational conversation about this. And the only reason I phrase it that way is because I believe it's Wayne LaPierre who was on their national organization, and some of his rhetoric I thought was just kind of out there insofar as just taking care of business in a way that keeps people safe, understanding the Second Amendment and that you can own guns. But look, I have a Labrador Retriever, and we have to have all kinds of information documented for my pet, but not for a handgun. Right. I don't understand where he's coming from.
Yeah, the NRA did come to Massachusetts and did express opposition. The local gun owners actually at the end of the conclusion, when we're trying to put it finally together, decided to work with us to get some of their concerns in the bill. Were they happy? No. But at the end of the day, they couldn't say that I did not sit down and talk to them, that I did not listen to them. And probably the more strident members probably weren't happy at all.
Right.
Just strictly relying on their so-called Second Amendment rights, which was never my intention to.
Exactly.
To trample on Second. This has nothing to do with Second Amendment rights. This is all about, safety.
Safety. And I always thought that you bringing up the Second Amendment was such a convenient out, for them. And when you talk about, particularly in inner cities, all the proliferation of gun violence and all these young kids killing themselves or killing others, or folks having unprotected guns in their household, and Junior gets a hold of the gun and is just kind of playing around, not meaning to hurt anybody, pop, it goes off, and then somebody's hurt or
dies.
That's
another part of the bill in terms of making sure that you keep them in a safe and secure place.
Yeah, yeah. I want to segue from that to what you just talked about, and that's the mental health issue, which is huge for us, as you know, at the Sheriff's Department. 42% of our population suffers from mental illness. 36% of the female population actually has co-occurring issues with mental health and substance abuse. Talk to us about mental health, and from your perch, what can be done to either, one, really address this issue in a holistic way, or two, find a way, and I know we're in tough budgetary times, but get some more money back into the budget to get more beds for mental health. Right.
And that was one of the issues as well, mental health / substance abuse, I guess, to a certain extent as well. One of the things that we found, first of all, you're right. You hit it right on the head when you said there just weren't enough beds. What I had found was that I decided that I was going to travel to some of the emergency wards around the state of the hospitals, because I would hear complaints from the hospitals that about 25% of the beds were taken up by those with mental health / substance abuse.
Okay.
And I quickly learned from the New England Medical Center, was the first that I had visited, and sure enough, there were 35 beds, and about 8 or 9 of them were taken up by mental health patients.
Okay.
And when I say taken up, I mean just that. Those people were not getting any help. They were just literally lying in a bed in the emergency ward, and they had a nurse or a nurse's aide sitting and just watching them. So number one, the hospital's wasting money.
Right.
And number two, and more importantly, the patient's not getting any assistance. So we try to make it a little bit easier for them to move out of the hospital setting and into a mental health setting. In addition to that, created more beds along the way. In addition to that, when you had folks that had the substance abuse issue as well, insurance companies were only required to carry up to 2 days of coverage for a person getting substance abuse treatment. We changed that
2 days?
2 weeks.
Yeah,
I think with 2 days, you're literally going to step out than step right back in.
Exactly.
And Mr. Sheriff, you know, after having the opportunity to sit down and talk to you and on these issues and a whole host of things, let me just say, first of all, I really appreciate the progressive attitude that you have and how you run your jail with this. Because you know these folks are going to be hopefully getting out at some point. And if they're going to be ready for society, then these issues have to be addressed.
Well, you know what? I'll take it a step further, sir. So between the ages, let me see, middle school, probably the 6th grade, until I actually was a sophomore in college, my mother had a pretty serious alcohol dependency problem. And it started from depression. When she and my dad divorced when I was 2 years old, a toddler, she fell into like a slow depressive state that just got increasingly worse. Now, you're familiar with the term functioning alcoholic, so she could go to work, you know, do what she had to do, come home, take care of her kids, make sure we had food and clothes and so on, the creature comforts, but then she would drink herself to sleep every night, you see. And so witnessing that, and then, you know, fast forward to being at the Sheriff's Department, and I still see these kind of things, it hits home in a real hard way to me, because I remember what we had to do to get my mother clean and sober. And so, but because we were able to achieve that, I know it can be done, you see. And so when you say progressive, I just think that, and you may have heard me say this, the hallmark of any vibrant society is how you take care of the most compromised in that society. And I see folks with addiction problems, mental health issues, our kids, our seniors, you know, if you can help, it's incumbent upon you to help. And so that's what we try to do at the Sheriff's Department, is to say, okay, how do we look at this in a holistic fashion so that we can get folks the care they need? Even if we can't provide it, let's partner with an organization. In fact, we're talking to some of the community health centers now about actually coming in and matching them up with our inmate population 3 to 4 months before they exit. In this way, they have a healthcare practitioner once they leave. And what I call it is a warm call versus a cold call once they get out. And so I think that we have to do these kind of things, like what you're talking about with looking at the bills that you're working on. How do you get the most, dare I say, particularly around guns, bang for the buck? But how do you get the most out of that so that at the end of the day, your communities are taken care of? I mean, I mean, is that how you guys look at it? Getting as much without offending either side of the discussion?
In a certain extent, I suppose, yes. I mean, first thing is I have to get to 81 votes, and obviously if people on either side of the equation are unhappy, then they're going to go to their local reps, and we're going to have some issues. And you'd be surprised, again, if one side was the Second Amendment, the other side's, well, if it's mental health, we also don't want to affect the rights of those mentally ill. So we, you know, you hear it from them as well. So even though your intentions may be good, there are those who, you know, sometimes rightfully so, want to make sure that no one's rights are being trampled on, and I can appreciate that. But what I have, one of the biggest issues that I can see in the legislature and in the state, as I travel throughout the state, is the issue, quite frankly, of opioid.
I was just about to ask you about that.
Abuse. I mean, it is 1,000 deaths in 1 year. And I can say, Mr. Sheriff, that this isn't just a city problem. And if you think it is, you're sadly mistaken.
It's not.
Rich communities, poor communities, middle-class communities, I've just seen it all. You know, I've been to a number of funerals of people, unfortunately, who have passed. Number of stories about how NARCAN has saved a number of lives.
Actually.
Let me say, if it wasn't for NARCAN, I would shudder to think what the numbers of deaths would be. But I don't think NARCAN's the answer, obviously. It's a stopgap measure. But we've got to get those folks help. And that's why it's important for someone like yourself, before these folks, you know, get back into society, whether it's the health centers or whatever it may be, if you can get them the help.
Well, let me touch on a little bit. First and foremost, we actually teach the inmate population how to use NARCAN, you know, so that when they're out there doing what they do with their buddies and something happens, they know how to use it. We think that's just a responsible way to look at it. But there's a drug that you may have heard of called VIVITROL. And we're in the process of a pilot program now utilizing VIVITROL. Sheriff Cummings, one of my brother's sheriffs, has used it for 3 years and has had some real good outcomes with using that, and it's actually an opiate depressant, which utilized the right way, you take one shot every 30 days, has actually weaned people off of the opiates. Now I'm making it sound like it's simple. Clearly, it's not. But
I have heard.
It's so much so. And I got to tell you, right around the House of Correction, we have 3 methadone clinics. 3. And I look at methadone, frankly, and this is just me speaking, folks, but I look at it as heroin light, because it's just medication. It's not weaning them off of the problem. And what they do is they go in and get their medication, and they kind of wander around that whole area, and they leave, garbage, and other things happen. And, and I know that folks like yourselves in the city of Boston and others are looking at this situation. But I sat on a panel with Senator Markey last year. What I did not know is Massachusetts has the 3rd highest number of addicts in the country. The 3rd. We're the 3rd. I did not know that, And so it's really out of control now,
Yeah.
And to have yourself and the governor and the mayor and others really looking at this now and saying, okay, time out. We've really got to address the situation.
Yeah, we've been puttering around, and years ago, I think I even chaired Ways and Means. I could see that there was an issue. And, you try to find what is that answer.
Yeah.
And I can remember at the time I thought, well, we got to get tougher. That's got to be one of the answers. We got to have beds. We have to have more help. And we sort of put it all into one piece of legislation. And quite frankly, although it didn't hurt, I'm not sure it's helped. And I just see us going down this road year after year after year, to the point where, and I know you've heard the story about heroin being so cheap.
Yeah,
now,
it really is.
That that has become the drug, obviously, of choice.
Yeah.
And in doing so, has caused not only problems, but in many cases, deaths. I mean, I've seen some young people, some young athletes, I use that word, young, good students, whatever you want to say, who have unfortunately got caught up in it, the drug habit, and the results have not been good.
Well, years ago when people foolishly would begin to dabble in, using narcotics, nowadays my understanding is a lot of these folks get hooked through painkillers. They've had some sort of accident, when you talk about athletes, and or something has happened, they've been in the service, and they've been given Oxycontin or one of these drugs, and not with the intention to get them hooked on drugs, but that's what happens. And so my understanding is, if I got this correctly, is that that's part of the spiral out of control. And I know the governor's folks were talking about, Secretary Sutters is talking about, the pharmacies and the doctors, and talking about, not prescribing that unless it's absolutely necessary. And in one of these roundtable discussions, a woman said she had a backache or something, and she went in, and they gave her like 30 Oxycontins. 30! And she said she didn't need 30, but I mean, that's out of control.
I would say that it's funny you should say that, because that happened to me. I had an arm operation years later, baseball type of thing with the elbow, and they gave me some Percocets, I think it was, and I think I took 2 of them. Yeah. But they gave me 30.
They gave you, right, exactly, right.
And one of the issues that I had that I spoke to the governor, which I hope this commission is going to take a look at, is why 30? Can we start with 5 maybe, and if it really persists, then we can talk about more, or are there alternatives to to these types of medications? But you're right. I've heard many a story where a good athlete got some type of injury, and as such started on that stuff and just continued. So the good part is, I think there is a realization that it is a problem. I think there's an acceptance that it's a problem.
Yeah.
I don't hear so much. Yeah. Not in my neighborhood. That's a problem over there, but not here. And I think there's a real strong awareness. There's a lot of discussion. I can tell you in my district, and I can say everywhere.
I was going to say, and probably in every district,
right?
And you're right. So it's not in my neighborhood; it's in everybody's neighborhood, And so, with that said, you mentioned having to get a certain number of votes to get whatever legislation moving forward. Talk to us about politics real briefly. We've only got about 4 minutes left, and there's this saying that heavy is the head that wears the crown, okay? I'm sure you've heard that, right? And the first time I was like, what are you talking about? Until I became sheriff, and then I was like, oh, I got it now. How I find it very interesting, real quickly, how there'll be whatever issue.
Yeah.
And someone from my staff will come in, and they'll lay it on the table, and they'll tell me what this issue is, right? And I'll say to them, so how would you deal with it? And they'll say, blah, 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 blah. And I say, well, you know what? That's how I would deal with it. Why are you in here telling me about this, you know? But I find, you know, getting consensus and getting people motivated to get something done is not the easiest thing to get done, but once you get it done, it's really gratifying. Certainly Talk to us, you know, from your perch about, and you know, Speaker of the House, I mean, that's a big, big situation. The politics of moving people to really get consensus. How difficult or not is that?
It can be very difficult, especially when you have 160 members.
Right.
You know, sometimes some things you just snap your fingers and it can be done.
Right.
I wish it were that easy. I try to build it through consensus building, spending a lot of time. Sometimes I'll have 10, 20 reps in my office talking about an issue. What's your problem with it? Oh, then what's your problem with it?
Right.
Well, if we do this to do that, then does that get us, you know, to go?
Right.
So it does take a whole lot of discussion. It takes a whole lot of educating people what the bill may be all about. Maybe they don't understand that. And finally, at the end of the day, you know, we got to move forward. So
something's got to get done.
Something has to get done. So at that point, you say, well, this is what it's got to be. You know, we considered this, we compromised as much as we could, and we got to move forward. And I suppose that's what being a leader is all about. And you know, I can tell you, but it's not just about me in terms of making these get done. When I talked about the bills that we did last year, whether it was gun violence, whether it was opioids, whether it was domestic violence, you know, we went forward some very strong legislation, somewhat controversial legislation, but it really took the will of all of the members to understand and wanting to get that place to yes, so that we could move forward and better represent our constituents. So
talking about leadership now, so you've got a new governor, and you've got a new Senate president, and you got the wily fox there, right?
Yeah, you're the best. You really. We should tell the people we were at meetings together. The other sheriffs are looking at us making these wise cracks. Right? Yeah.
But I say that to say, from what I've read in the newspaper, it seems as though, for the most part, all three of you are able to sit down and really talk about what's best for the Commonwealth and get stuff done. Would that be an accurate statement?
That would be accurate. I think that we, you know, started with a little bit of a deficit from last year, a deficit from this year, and those are difficult situations. MBTA situation that we had to try to take care of, major snowstorms that we had to work together on. So what has been good that I have found so far this year is that we've all come together, maybe varied opinions at one point or another, able to put the egos aside and just say,
and that's the big thing.
Let's get to the point where we address the issues. And so far, it's been good. Now we're going to have disagreements. We sure are.
Absolutely.
You know, the former governor, DeVal Patrick, someone I respected very much. You know, proud as a Democrat and whatnot. But we all had disagreements. You know, I have disagreements with the Senate president. You know, the governor's disagreements with me, whatever it may be. But at the end of the day, as long as I believe that you realize that your opinion, or most importantly, the opinion of your body, the House is being heard, and then as such, you know, you put it all together and say, okay, well, where can we come down here that everybody's interest has been addressed, and we can move forward.
Right. And like
so far, so good.
Like you said, everybody's not going to be happy with everything, but with so many issues on the table, also, you know, everybody has a chance to get their voice heard and get their viewpoint out there.
Sure.
You know, on one of the issues or another, I would imagine.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Now, as we close here, did you plan to get in politics? I mean, did you come from a civically active family, and this was something that you always wanted to do? Or did you just kind of like me, kind of fell in like backwards into politics and said, what happened? How'd I get here?
My parents were somewhat dabbled in it, but I can't say we're really just fully into it. Some of the funny stories were when I was a youngster, like 5 or 6 years old, I'd love to watch conventions and get up on the chair or the table and mimic whoever was speaking. Republicans and Democrat conventions, by the way, so I was nonpartisan
even at 5
at this time. But you know what? I think that when people talk about whether it's being sheriff, being a rep or a speaker or whatnot, you have to be in there for the right reason. Otherwise, you're not going to be good at it, and you're not going to succeed. You know, I get my greatest thrills, Mr. Sheriff, when, you know, I hear, you know, when a family with children with autism come into my office and say, we can't thank you enough for what you had. Okay. I had 2 women who came into my office the other day who talked about how the domestic violence protections made a difference in their lives. Those are the things that I think, you know, I feel pretty good about. Yeah, you feel good when you pass a bill and you got it done. But when you hear that it actually has meant something in someone's lives and improved someone's life, that's what makes it
That's what it's all
worthwhile.
about. Hey, sir, listen, we've got to have you back. I love having you here. It's a great joy and pleasure
Let me congratulate you by the great job that you did. Some people may not, you know, have the opportunity also maybe to visit or, you know, take a walk. But I'll tell you, I was so impressed in terms of the educational programs that you offer, the you know, the carpentry programs, all these various programs to prepare these folks when they get out. You talked a little bit about the drug and alcohol rehabilitation. Let me congratulate you on the great job as a resident of Suffolk County.
There we go.
How proud we are to have you as our sheriff.
Thank you so much, sir. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
All right, folks, we're going to go to a bit of a break. On the other side, we've got Michael Curry, the president of the Boston chapter of the NAACP, who's going to join us next. So please do stay tuned.